After years of stoking the conspiracy theories around Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump has decided it's time for his base to move on and, quote, not waste time and energy on Jeffrey Epstein. So will that work? Or could this finally be the issue that drives a wedge between the US president and his MAGA faithful? So Freddie, you have written a piece for the New Statesman this week grappling with Trump, Epstein, and MAGA.
Yeah.
This is a conspiracy story inside a conspiracy story inside a mystery trapped in a riddle. I'm not going to ask you to start from the very beginning and give us all of the details. I think that listeners will probably have a working knowledge of the basics here. So I wonder if we start with the Trump-Epstein politics, and in particular, I guess the role of the Epstein conspiracy theory, or valid questions, depending on your perspective, has played in Trump's political campaigns over the year. How has he seized on this? How has he used this? And what were his supporters really expecting he would do once he got back into the White House and was in a position to finally take some action here?
What we have to recognize is how important conspiracy theories are to MAGA world. They're the sort of pistons on which the MAGA mythos is driven and fuels itself. The Jeffrey Epstein saga, I think, is much more powerful than some of the others because it's rooted in certain truths. You know, he was a notorious sexual predator. There are genuine questions around his death. There are genuine questions about his connections to other people. So there are certain people who are journalists or, non-conspiratorial thinkers who can legitimately ask these questions. And then there are also these broader conspiracy theories about, did he have a client list? Was he a Mossad agent? Was he trying to manipulate the powerful around the world through extortion and blackmail? So these sorts of things. I mean, the interesting thing is that Donald Trump, as we know, was extremely close to Jeffrey Epstein. They both come from similar backgrounds in New York. They socialized together. Trump would travel on Epstein's jet. But then Trump actually, when he entered politics, decided to use the Epstein conspiracy and the rumors around his death to his own advantage. The day after Epstein died in jail, Trump actually retweeted a conspiracy about Bill Clinton and the fact that lots of people suspiciously died around Bill Clinton. The implication being, obviously, that the Clintons were in some way involved in the death of Jeffrey Epstein. So he's really playing with fire here. And we're seeing the consequences of that now. Because he was so close, why stoke that fire? Why rile up his supporters if it could come back to bite him? So he let his riders in the media, his acolytes, his online fan base to ask for years and years and years, where are the files? Where are these lists? We need to publish them. And then it's obviously, as soon as he gets in, he changes his mind. He tells his supporters to shut up. He says, we actually need to move on and we need to focus on the big, beautiful bill or inflation or whatever it might be. And they're annoyed about that. And that's where we are now. And we've seen 2 weeks of rigmarole and haranguing and disputation and anger from both sides, because I think there are many parts of his base who have listened to him, and maybe we could talk about how important conspiracy theories are in that relationship between the two. And they're now seeing him tell them to go home, tell them to stop asking questions. So there is a sense of betrayal there.
What are the main outstanding questions that particularly some of the more important figures in the base have, that they thought he was going to provide answers to, and that they still believe there's something being covered up or there is something important that's unexplained here?
So there are lots of files. And when people talk about files, they're talking about the court documents and the FBI investigative papers and things like that. So Trump did say last week that he is going to ask the DOJ to ask a court to release the grand jury documents into investigation. A grand jury is essentially like a jury, but it happens before a trial, and it's about whether the accused should go to trial or not. So it's all the documents related to that. So the DOJ have gone to the court and they're asking for them to release those files. That will take a long time. So that's one example of what they could release. There is no proof that there is this client list, this list of people that Jeffrey Epstein provided underage girls to. There's no proof that that exists, but that's completely central to the conspiracy theory, because it would be that list that shows you who has been blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein if the conspiracy theory was true. So that's what they're looking for. And then the reason that this whole saga kicked off in the recent weeks is because Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who had been talking up these files, who had been saying, we're going to release them, I've got them on my desk right now. She even had all these MAGA influencers in the White House, if you remember, and they're holding up these binders that said phase 1 of the Epstein files. She released a report saying that there are no further questions to be answered. He definitely committed suicide in that jail, and there's no client list. And everyone was like, okay, well, either you've been lying to us for years, or you've been genuinely believing that, and suddenly you've entered government and realized that you were just wrong and incompetent, or you're trying to cover something up. So that's what kicked this off. So there's this complete refusal to release these papers, and Trump's backtracked, as I said, with these grand jury documents, but there are still genuine documents out there that people want to see.
What about, you mentioned Jeffrey Epstein died in custody in 2019, and Trump was active on social media after that. What role does his death play, and the lingering questions over the manner of his death? Is that something that people still believe is unanswered or unexplained, whether Jeffrey Epstein did indeed kill himself or not?
Yeah, it is. There are genuine questions about the way in which he was able to hang himself in a quite literal sense. You know, how was it that he was able to break his neck or break his Adam's apple, from that height? And there are also questions about why he was in a cell by himself when he had reportedly tried to kill himself a few days before, and the jail had said this person needs to be on suicide watch. There are questions about why the guards outside were asleep at that time. There are also questions about the data, the metadata behind the surveillance video of the camera outside of his cell door, why that's been tampered with, and why there are certain gaps in the video. So there are genuine questions. Yeah, I mean, this the sort of the point with this whole thing is that you can ask these genuine questions, and then quite quickly you can get into these very fantastical, baroque, cosmological sort of arguments about this broader world of conspiracy theories and what have you. And was he killed in jail, or did he pay someone to help him kill himself in jail? The genuine questions, genuine answers have not been able to be provided. So that's part of the reason that this is being fueled. And this is, I don't think, necessarily going to disappear. I mean, Trump's tried to distract from this, as he always does, and he's been flailing a little bit and struggling to do so. He did release yesterday a huge trove, I think about 250,000 pages of files related to the assassination of Martin Luther King, and also the investigations into him by the FBI and others. And that was obviously an attempt both to persuade and bring round his supporters who are looking for more documents, but it was also a distraction tactic. He's also now got Tulsi Gabbard, his director of national intelligence, to say that Barack Obama was involved in these files that led to the Russiagate investigations. So it's a constant distraction, and that's what he's trying to do. But the interesting thing now is that congressionally, there's lots of bills and movements and discharge instructions that are going through, and Congress essentially has woken up to the fact that maybe we should be asking Trump and asking the executive to be more open and honest about this. This was the first time that Mike Johnson, the Speaker, has actually distanced himself from Trump and said, no, we do need to see the files. He's since backtracked a bit on that, but it was fascinating because there were some genuine splits here. And it didn't happen over the big, beautiful bill or the cuts to Medicaid or the tax cuts for the rich. It wasn't about those economic populist positions that Trump, ran way more so on in 2016, but also ran a little bit on in 2020. It was this conspiracy theory, this broader fight about government transparency, about the deep state. This was the thing that really pissed people off. I think that's fascinating. I think it says so much, and it really explains so much of what the MAGA movement is and where we've come to in the past 6 months.
How does this fit into the broader sort of conspiratorial worldview that has helped propel Trump to this point, and the sense that he, as somebody who was not of the traditional political class, who was not a creature of the Washington swamp, was going to get into the White House and really blow the lid off all of these, the elite pedophile gang conspiracy? Like, where does he fit into that firmament, and how has he been able to ride that wave up until this point?
Yeah, I mean, he was always their guy on the inside in a way. He was always the man that was part of the establishment, but also on the outside. I remember in 2016, his whole pitch was, I've been donating to politicians for so long. I know how corrupt it is. I've been buying political favors in New York. I'm going to fund my own campaign because I'm that rich. So it's this inside-outside dynamic. And he's been trading on that for a very long time. I'm successful. I am wealthy. I'm aspirational. But I'm also not this condescending, liberal, metropolitan member of the elite. So that's, again, I think what The Apprentice TV show was about as well. And it's coming to a little bit of a head now. What I find interesting as well is that Trump is currently suing the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch for a story that they published last week, which they claim was an extract from a birthday card that Trump sent to Epstein back in 2003 with a lewd drawing and a reference to a secret that they share every single day. And Trump completely denies it, and hence he's suing them. But it's fascinating that Rupert Murdoch, this fellow billionaire, someone who Trump has known for decades and whose papers he would read in the 90s, and the, the New York Post and the Journal and then Fox helped propel Trump to office in 2016. They're finally fighting to get out over this sort of sordid, horrible story. And I think it reminds people that Trump is actually of this, as you say, he's actually of this sort of oligarchic elite, and he's always been there. In the same way, Murdoch, actually, there's many similarities between the two, this sort of inside-outside, being rich, being in the room, but also being at the corner. So they're fighting that out, and I think that's a fascinating reminder of where Trump came from. And I also think that people who want to succeed him will look at this and go, well, you don't really want to be seen in the box with Rupert Murdoch. You don't want to be part of this horrible elite that the masses, sort of hate and resent, and who Trump's base look down on. So I think it's fascinating because it reminds people how old Trump is.
Right.
He's been around for a very long time.
That tees up perfectly the next question I wanted to ask you about the political calculations for people who are already thinking right now about the 2028 presidential election and who fancy very much the idea of succeeding Trump, and crucially in the course of doing that, inheriting the MAGA movement, the MAGA base. How are you seeing people like J.D. Vance approach this and the calculation of trying to keep Trump on side? It's interesting to me to see a lot of the criticism being aimed at Pam Bondi, or the sort of boyars in the system who are seen as the ones who are maybe not telling Trump everything. So he still seems to a little bit be sitting above it, but not wanting to diminish his voters, the people who are genuinely looking for answers here. Is anybody managing to perform that contortion successfully? And who are the people who you would be keeping an eye on here? Like Vance, for instance, how has he dealt with this?
Well, he sent one extremely supportive tweet, and he waited for the Wall Street Journal story to come out before he really got involved in the dispute, which I think is interesting because finally there was a target that he could attack, which wasn't a complete defense of not releasing the files. Because remember, during the campaign last year, Vance was on Theo Vaughan's podcast and said, "Release the Epstein files. We need to see them." But, he as much as anyone else has been fanning the flames of this desire to release the files. So it's very tricky for him and for everyone. I mean, but as soon as the Wall Street Journal story came out, they had a common enemy, which was the mainstream media, which they could say had fabricated the story, and Trump doesn't speak like that, which is interesting, the same defense that he used for the Hollywood Access video back in 2016. That's not how I speak. It can't be me. for everyone else in the cabinet, whether it's Rubio or Vance or Hegseth, essentially their whole political lives for the next 4 years is completely dependent on Trump's survival. So they're always going to have to be loyal. That should just be the baseline. If they want to get to 28, if they want to be competitors, if they want to be on that stage for the Republican convention, then they're going to have to win over Trump's support. So they're very conscious of that. Whatever's going to come up, they're going to support. But obviously, they don't want to be hitched to this horrible, sordid story, which they are genuinely not connected to. It's not like there are records of Vance going on this plane. It's not like he has this complication that Trump has. So I think they're going to be playing, as they always are, a quite difficult balancing act where they have to both be loyal to Trump and also not isolate the base, because they've always got one eye on what's coming next.
Is it surprising to you or interesting to see who has and who hasn't come out to say, no, we're not going to shut up and move on, as the president has now several times suggested? We do still have questions. Who are the people who you think are driving the no, we're not going to go away? And do you think Trump will be able to mollify them, or they're going to stick to their guns on this?
Yeah, the main person who isn't mollified is Tucker Carlson. The people in the movement who are upset, but in some ways have been mollified, include Charlie Kirk, the MAGA influencer, Steve Bannon, who runs a very popular podcast now, and Alex Jones, the sort of godfather of conspiracies. It's interesting, Jones has come out and in his very crazy way tried to justify Trump as sort of like secretly trying to keep the file so eventually he can expose it to a greater extent. They're really in this business of contorting the facts and trying to provide justifications. But those three have essentially said, okay, I trust Trump. He's going to give us something. We've got the grand jury stuff now, and let's give them time. And Charlie Kirk said he's got friends in the government who he trusts, and he's known these people for a very long time, which is fascinating, obviously, because these people have been criticizing the deep state and the government for so many years that suddenly, because Trump has taken over, they are defending it. They're defending authority. I mean, Tucker Carlson is doubling down on the Mossad agent angle, which is
Can you just flesh that out for us a little bit for people who are not following this? It's absolutely a fascinating theory, and I think people deserve to know the
I think we should fully emphasize that this is a theory and there's no evidence for it, and this is Tucker Carlson, who is a very untrustworthy source. And so essentially the theory is that Jeffrey Epstein was working with Mossad, and it's part of the broader anti-Semitic Jewish conspiracy theory that in some way the Israelis are managing to control powerful leaders around the world, and perhaps the way in which they did so was getting Jeffrey Epstein to film these powerful people having sex with underage girls and then blackmailing them. So that's the sort of theory, or that's a theory. I mean, Tucker Carlson sometimes also says that, he just works for Mossad. There isn't necessarily this blackmail ring, but he was definitely an intelligence asset. Steve Bannon said something similar. They'll point to the fact that the Ghislaine Maxwell, his associate and co-conspirator, essentially, who is in jail for sex trafficking, her father was connected to Robert Maxwell was connected to the intelligence services and things like this. So he's running with that. He's absolutely running with that, and I don't think he'll necessarily shut up about it. And also remember that Tucker Carlson's been spoken of as a presidential candidate for a long time now. There are many people, I think, in the Republican Party that are actually quite happy for Trump to be damaged in this way. And they'll be watching to see whether they can damage other people. They're all rivals now. They're not necessarily on the same team, because you have to remember that in America, presidential elections, they never stop. It's not like they wait for the election and then suddenly everyone goes, okay, who should we vote? They're always campaigning. And we're seeing that in the Democratic Party, and we're seeing that right now with the Republican Party. We don't know Tucker Carlson's going to run, obviously. He's just been spoken of as someone who might run for a very long time.